check. 1, 2, it's your boy, Kenny T, Kilo Tango Aviation. Okay, now we're on part 3 of the ACS review with Kenny T. So this part covers the cross-country, airspace, and performance. And the reason that all these go together is because when you do your cross-country presentation with your Checkride evaluator, all those things are going to get covered. I'm gonna go through each section to show you, but you'll see how it all comes together into really one whole comprehensive evaluation. But we'll start with just kind of the expectations for the cross-country planning, and then airspace, and then performance, and then how it all goes together. So in the ACS, task D, we got cross-country planning. In the cross-country planning, the knowledge that you have to demonstrate are all these areas here, right? And all of these things are things that you're going to find when you do your cross-country planning. And when you're doing your cross-country planning, you should be following some type of checklist or guide, either from flight school or another place that has step 1 through 10 on how you're supposed to do your plannings. Finding the 2 points, drawing a line, figuring out the distance, looking at the airspace, looking at terrain, other things like that to help you determine how you're going to make your decision on your route, waypoints, etc., things like that. There's 2 ways, let's say 2, but 1, 2, there's 2 ways that you can do it. Now, what's new here, and specifically or illicitly or specifically, however you want to say it, actually tells you about using an EFB for your flight plan. I'll caution you, I'm gonna draw a line here, right? I think that, it's 2024. I think that you should be able to use an EFB, iPad for flight, whatever it is, to do your flight plan. But you will likely learn how to do the paper log while you're training, depending on what school you're using, even if it's just initially. But a lot of people are going to use the EFB and the for flight because that's what you use in real life. So the fact that you're going to follow a checklist to go through and learn all these things doesn't change just because you're using EFB. You still got to know how to do this stuff. Everything from the calculations for time, distance, etc., to figuring out the performance calculations. So let's go through this real quick. So first we got the EFB if used, right? So being able to do the planning, understand the airspace, so as be able to explain that. So you have to have a good understanding of the airspace when you're coming up with your plan. Time to climb, descents, course, distance, heading, true airspeed, and ground speed. If you're using EFB, it's going to calculate it for you. The thing is, your evaluator might ask you how it comes up with those numbers. How can you estimate it? Do you understand, even if whether you use the E6B or not, your whiz wheel, being able to kind of understand how it comes up with that information, what it uses. Your ETA for each point, fuel requirements including reserve. Do what's your fuel requirements, daytime, or if you're flying at nighttime, what do you need to have? And not only what you need to have, but what's your minimums for it, right? So for me, even though it's 30 minutes, I like to have an hour of fuel for the most when I'm doing my planning for a VF. The different elements of a flight plan, so be able to pull up a flight plan and talk through each of the different blocks that's going to be in. Just like, do you understand how to file a flight plan? If you've never filed a flight plan before you check ride, you've already failed. So you need to make sure that you can file a flight plan, you know how to activate a flight plan, and then the in-flight intercept procedures, that's one that they put on there. What are you going to do if some F-22s come up there and say what's up to you? How do you deal with that? So that's going to be right here. Let's take a look at that in this section here. When you're looking at your cross-country planning, there's some risk mitigation factors that we look at. And an acronym that's always used is PAVE. So pilot, aircraft, environment, that's the V, E, external pressures. And then any limitations, fuel planning, and use of EFB, kind of talked about that. So pilot, what are the limitations of pilot? How are you going to manage your risk as a pilot? Some ways you do that is I'm safe, using the I'm safe checklist. That is one of the most common ways that we check to make sure the pilot's good. Aircraft, how do you make sure the aircraft's good? Well, we talked about that in the first part of the ACS, and that's going to be all your inspections. Environment, weather. We previously, like I said, this whole part of the cross-country planning covers almost the entire first section because you cover your aircraft we talked about, environment, external pressures, that goes into what factors are going to push you either one way or the other when you come with your Limitations of air traffic control service. So it depends on where you're at, how much services you have, and how they can help you, or how you're going to use them to help with your planning and execution of your fuel planning is part of the flight plan, and that's usually EFB. So risk mitigation. What are some risks of having the EFB? People say, "Oh, what if your battery dies?" Yeah, well, have a backup, or have an extra charger, or have a plug. Think of ways that you're gonna back yourself up. For me, I also keep my phone as well. So I have my iPad and also have my phone both with ForeFlight. So if I have an issue one, I still have one as a backup. I also have you have a plug or extra battery, and that's one way to mitigate failure of your EF. Some people will also want you to have an extra chart. Like I said, I use electronic charts. I do not carry a paper chart, but that's technique only. Technique only. You got to use your own technique and what you feel comfortable with. And that's why it's risk management, how you're going to manage your risk. So task E, they're going to be testing your understanding of the airspace. When you look at your flight plan, you should be able to talk through from when you take off, en route, and when you land, what airspace you're in, what the weather requirements are, and the equipment requirements in each and every part of your flight plan. If you can't do that, then you don't really have a good idea of your flight plan. Also being able to understand any restricted areas, any MOAs, any limitations of anything that has to do with your flight plan. Be able to talk to everyone else. And the thing is, you can practice this stuff before you even get to your check ride. So you're not trying to guess or figure it out once you get to your evaluator. You can sit there and open up the FAR, open up the AIM, open up your VFR sectional guide, and go through every single point to be able to review what it actually. So that goes. Look, chart symbols, special use airspace, everything I just said. Being able to understand all that stuff. Now, how are you going to minimize your risk or manage your risk in this environment? So, what are you going to do to comply with the basic VFR weatherman class airspace? So, when you look at your weather forecast, being able to understand where weather's at, what the weather's doing, if it's changing for better or worse, and if that's something that you need to be concerned with. And if you need to either A, come up with a diversion plan or come up with an alternate route, depending on what the weather could do. So having the knowledge and then being able to show that you have the skills to do all the things we talked about, understand and be able to operate properly in the air. Easy, right? It could be. Just take your time and actually go through each of these things yourself. Can I do each and every one of these things for my route? All right, so your performance limitations. That's task F. This section can kind of trip people up because, well, this is all your calculations and stuff. This is stuff that you go through and you can do by hand. So your takeoff distance, your configuration for if you need to do a soft field or short field takeoff, things of that nature that you need to figure out before you even show up that day. That's stuff you can figure out the day before, a few days before, whenever you actually get your flight plan from the evaluator. The weight of your evaluator, the weight of all your equipment, being able to do your weight and balance. Calculating all that, you can do it two ways. Once again, it's two ways. You can do it by hand or you can do it with the EFB or with the ForeFlight or your iPad. If you do it with the EFB and you understand how to do it by hand, it helps you understand whether or not you put in the information right in the EFB, which is why I recommend that when you first start learning it, you do it by hand. But I do believe that you should then go ahead and do it on the EFB. Because if you can do it on paper and on the EFB and it makes sense, then you're probably doing it right. The other thing, when you're using ForeFlight, you want to make sure that when you go into the aircraft specific performance calculations, you put the information that's in the POH. A lot of times it'll have some of that stuff already loaded up, but go in and check it because your evaluator may ask, all right, well, your ForeFlight says you're climbing at this speed. Is this the speed your aircraft climbs at? And you should know that because you're the one that sets it up. Go in your POH, check to see if that's climb speed, see if it's cruise speed, and make sure that it makes sense and that it's not way off. It might be off by a knot or two, but the thing is, it should be really close and you'll be able to explain what the information is actually in there. So that's your configurations and all that stuff. Now let's look at the risk management. Are you using the performance chart tables? It's like I'm talking about this stuff and then the ACS is telling me what I just said. So understanding what the charts limitations are, that's risk management, is doing what I just said, right? And the Airplane limitations, understand limitations of your max speeds are, all those things. That's something you have to know because you got to know your airplane. Once again, POH. And here's something to take in consideration when you're looking at the performance calculations, the possible difference between calculated performance and actual performance. What are some factors that can weigh on why you have the performance that's in the books to the actual performance you're actually getting in an airplane? And I'll give you a couple things. One, that book is based off of a brand new plane test flown by a test pilot. Now, if you're a student pilot getting your private pilot certificate, you're not close to being a test pilot, and I guarantee you, your plane ain't close to new. So, those are some things that you might have some differences in your performance. So, don't work at the edge of the envelope because at the edge of the envelope is going to really be pushing you to take away some of the safety margins you have. So that's some of the differences that you'll have to consider. And then let's look at some of the skills. So computing the weight and balance, carry out of CG loading errors to determine if the weight and balance remains within the limits during. Can you demonstrate that you know how to do weight and balance? Like I said, do it on the iPad. That's my recommendation because it's there. You can use a calculator. So that's what I would do. And once again, these are all things you can practice. And you know what they're going to ask you. They're going to ask you a question kind of like this. So if you add a person or if you take away fuel, these are things you can practice before you get to your evaluation. And then when you have to do it, it's done and you know how to do it. And make sure you're using appropriate airplane performance charts, tables, and data. When you look at your data, there'll be times where it has different settings like this is for takeoff at this altitude, and this is takeoff with flaps, without flaps. Make sure that you're using the right performance data when you're looking at it and using it for your calculations, and you got the right airplane. I mean, if you fly multiple planes, you might look at the wrong sheet. So just make sure that you take your time and make sure you got the right information. All right, so that's the overview of ACS in this section here. Like I said, this section is cross-country, airspace, and performance. And this whole first section really all goes together because when you're planning for your cross-country, you're doing all of these things. Hence why when you actually get ready to do the check ride, it kind of flows in the natural order of things because it's the order in which you would do things as an actual pilot anyway. So there we go. That's it. Next time, we're going to cover all the operations of the different systems. So talk about what the different systems are and kind of some examples of what they'll be expecting. But that's it. Kenny T, Kilo T.